if you really want to think about pricing, then it's not a spreadsheet exercise. It's an exercise in thinking about how do we create value in the sales process, and that will determine how much you can charge.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the dynamic relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving, and our guest today is Scott Edinger, and here are 3 things you want to know about Scott before we start. He founded and runs Edinger Consulting, and it's been doing it since 2012, so he's very successful. He was an EVP, Executive Vice President at Zenger Folkman. He was a Senior Vice President of Sales at Huthwaite, and he just released his new book called The Growth Leader, Strategies to Drive the Top and Bottom Lines. And let's just be nice to him, even though he is a Florida State fan. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that from a Buckeye.
So I always start my podcast out with this question. I'm going to ask it anyway. Even if it doesn't apply, you riff on it. How did you get into pricing?
Well, I backed into it. I started my career in human resources because I was interested in avoiding sales. And I just had all of the sort of connotations that Dan Pink writes about in his book, To Sell is Human, all these negative connotations. So I tried to avoid it, actually, and got into human resources because I thought that would be the place for people development and helping others to be more successful than they might ordinarily be and creating culture. And then I realized in about 5 minutes that that's really not what I was ended up doing in human resources, too administrative. So then it took a long circular route to get back to the world of pricing, sales, and developing revenue. And I did so by finding something somewhat connected to human resources, the training industry. And that's where I started to work with Neil Rackham, author of Spin Selling and Rethinking the Sales Force, and found my appreciation for the discipline and the fundamentals and the incredible skill required to do this sort of art and science of selling and pricing creatively well.
Yeah, so that whole training industry is pretty interesting. And before we go back to training, though, it's fascinating because you started out in HR because you wanted to do people development.
Yes.
You move into sales or sales training,
mm-hmm.
and now you've written a book called The Growth Leader, which is actually there to help develop people. Is that not a true statement?
That is true. That is true. And along the way, the thing I realized most about selling is that good selling and good leadership are close cousins. The behaviors involved in succeeding in both. So I spent a bit of time in leadership development too. So this sort of puts a little bit of everything together in the growth leader.
What are the similarities? I've never tied those two together.
Yeah. Well, I think if you consider that good selling is about helping your clients to achieve their objectives, helping them to improve their condition and drive results with them, and ultimately to move them to action, right? If that's good selling, then good leadership is also about working with people to move them to action, to inspire, to motivate, to create change. And in this way, selling and leading have a lot of similarities in terms of skill set and the different approaches you'd apply to them.
Man, I'm going to have to think about that a little deeper.
We can right here if you'd like.
So it seems to me that there's a little bit of, I'm going to use the word misdirection, but I don't mean that in a bad way, right? If I'm selling something, I know what it is I'm trying to sell, and I'm still trying to give you the best outcome for yourself, right? I'm trying to explain to you what the value of my product is, and I want to help you make a really good decision, and your best decision happens to be my product, and I get that completely.
Mm-hmm.
And now we think about leadership, and it isn't like I'm trying to get you to buy something. Certainly I want you to act. Certainly I want you to do your job well, mm-hmm. but it feels like there's not as a direct connection there.
Well, without digging in too far semantically, how many times have you heard leaders say, I'm trying to get my team or my organization to buy into a new direction or a new strategy, right? So I think leaders are always selling their direction, their vision, their strategy, their approach, the way they want to take an organization, and in the same way that a really effective seller has their vision for what's possible for a client to achieve or to better their circumstances. So in that way, I'd still say, though I do think that misdirection probably connotes something too negative there, that there are some, I think, very appropriate similarities or ways that they are in sync with one another, I might say.
Yeah. So as you were talking, a while ago, I ran my own company, and I have to say, it surprised me how much everything I said mattered to people.
Oh yeah.
Right? It's like they listen, and it's like, oh no, I got to listen, because it's like half the time I'm just blowing and thinking out loud, and you just can't do that if you're leading. And then the other half of the time, I was surprised at how I couldn't get people to understand the direction we were going. And that's exactly what you're talking about, is can I get people bought into the vision?
Yeah. If, you had mentioned, part of the reason I say that idea of buying in, you had mentioned that in sales, you very specifically are trying to help your customer to make a decision to buy what you think would be most valuable to them. And in the same way, that's where I was coming at this idea that leaders are always talking again about their teams, their organizations buying into a culture or a strategy, committing to that, aligning around that, right? If there is a business buzzword that is synonymous with buying in, it would be aligning with, right? So in the same way that, you and I talked about college football beforehand, how many coaches talk about getting their teams to buy in to what they are trying to put forth. So in that way, again, I'd say the connection between leadership behavior and sales behavior, really similar, applied differently perhaps, but similar skills.
I just want to say one of my favorite things in the world is having aha moments and sharing aha moments, right? And I just had an aha moment.
Oh.
And so my aha moment was this. As an executive, as a CEO, as someone running a company, or even as an employee, when I was watching people running companies, I always just made the assumption, you said this, and the whole team turned and went that direction. And it's obvious now that you say that just doesn't happen.
Yeah. Not enough. That's for sure. Right.
Yeah. And so it really is a sales job. We have to, even as an executive, a CEO, we have to convince our team this is the right direction. This is what we want to do.
Yeah. And I do think a sales job in the best and most valuable elements of a sales job, right? Helping others to see things that they don't see, helping them to identify opportunities or solutions to issues that they did not come up with on their own, where they say, wow, that was helpful, that was valuable. That kind of selling is very much like leading. In that way, there's a lot of similarities in these two approaches.
Yep. Nice. Okay, so let's go back to pricing in the following sense. I want my salespeople to stop discounting so much. I want to win at higher prices. This is like, it has to be a huge softball I'm tossing you. Give me some hints.
Yeah. Well, I think number one, how many executives have said that, but then not been really sure what to ask their sales organization or their sales team to do as a result? And part of what I write about in The Growth Leader is that if you're an executive and you want to sell broader solutions, right, and you want to sell at a higher margin, and what executive isn't trying to do that with their business, then one area you might be missing is the value in the sales experience. There's lots of talk about customer experience. CX has its own acronym. But I've often said that the sales experience is the first mile of the customer experience highway. And if it's not good, people get off at exit 1 and have a customer experience someplace else. So that customer experience, that sales experience portion of it has to be valuable. And that value isn't going to come from just being a walking or talking brochure and telling prospects or potential clients or existing customers how good your stuff is, your products, your services, your offerings, solutions, whatever you want to call them. Simply telling them how good those things are won't get it done. You have to bring insight and expertise and your experience that helps them to navigate the complexities of their business, achieve their objectives, achieve their outcomes. So in that way, if you want to sell at a higher margin, sell at greater margins, or sell expanded solutions, then your ability to help customers to think differently, to help them to see problems that they hadn't anticipated or solutions that they hadn't considered, that part of the sales experience has to be a priority. That can become a differentiator.
Okay, I could see how everything you just said fits into the way I think, but I want to make sure that we're either on the same page or I'm about to learn something else that's really new. Right, one or the other.
Yeah.
What are the questions that you're going to ask your salespeople as an executive, right? You had brought this up in the first place. What are the questions you're going to ask your salespeople to say, are you providing the right sales experience, or are you using the right sales methodology?
Yeah. I think if you're an executive and you want to talk to your sales team about this, the best way is to get really pragmatic about, what are the problems that these customers are not aware of that we see. Like we show up and we've seen that movie 100 times. We know their circumstances from our vantage point, but they only know it from theirs. So what are the things that you're helping them to see based on our experience of knowing what's effective, what isn't working, what others are doing successfully? What are the solutions? Every customer comes to you with something in mind, right? How many times have you gone to buy something and had something in mind, but that is not the best thing or the best approach? So how are we helping customers or potential, customers, prospects to see additional solutions that they hadn't considered on their own? Where are you bringing resources from our organization, our subject matter expertise, to help them see things differently? Those are a few questions you could ask to really uncover, are we bringing some value in the sales experience, or are we showing up to pitch? Because if you're doing the latter, that's not real valuable. Client can go to the internet and get that online without wasting their time with you, right?
Absolutely right. And not only that, if you're pitching, you're talking about your product, you're talking about your features, and only experts care. Only experts can translate your features into their benefits or their value.
Sure.
And so if we're there trying to sell to someone who's never bought something like this before, they don't know. They came to you because they had a problem. They said, hey, here's my problem. But it turns out there's 7 other problems all around them.
Right.
And so now the question becomes, how do we help them see those problems? And I like to take it all the way out to, what's the dollar value of solving those problems? How much more profit are you going to make?
Sure.
If you go solve each one of those problems.
Right. Can you get that to be some sort of tangible impact? Or, it's not likely that you're going to help them to surface something they'd never considered before, right? They're smart about their business. But what's really very likely, and happens to every seller I've spoken with, is that their clients or their customers or prospects will see an issue and they'll say, yeah, I see that. But in their mind, it's sort of small. But again, because you've seen it really bite customers when they've made the wrong choices or the unintended consequences of a bad decision, you see how significant it can be. So your ability to illustrate that for them, make that tangible and pragmatic, that's very valuable. And then you have this kind of moment. You mentioned this aha moment a second ago here. They have that moment where they're like, oh, I should totally do this differently. And I see what you're saying now. Right? When they get that level of understanding. But if they don't have the expertise in your business with your kinds of stuff, I say stuff technically, product, services, offerings, capabilities, whatever, they don't have expertise with your stuff. So you have to make that pragmatic for them and help them see how it's going to help them to achieve their objectives or minimize some of the struggles and problems they're having.
Yeah, I often like to say, you as a salesperson have no idea how much value any individual customer is going to get from your product because you don't know their situation.
Right.
And your customer has no idea how much value they're going to get from your product because they haven't been through it. They don't know your product the way you know it. And it really takes both of you working together in order to figure out what this really is.
Absolutely. So to me, that is the power of what can be co-created in the sales experience. So the thing that most executives miss when they look for ways to differentiate in the market is they'll look for ways to differentiate on capability or product or service. And instead, one of the things that you can really differentiate on and win, in fact, McKinsey research I cite in the book says around a quarter of the decision process, in some cases up to half of the decision process based on that experience. The value of the sales experience. What did the seller or the sales team or the selling organization help me in terms of insight, help me with in terms of insight, help me with in terms of ideas or different approaches? That's hugely valuable. That can become a reason why customers select you in the face of competing alternatives.
Yeah. I mean, they're going to buy from people they trust. There's no doubt.
Right.
And if you can help them solve their problems or help them learn about their problems and learn what the good solutions might look like, then you're building that trust. And I like to think, I think in willingness to pay a lot. Mm-hmm. And so I think that if you helped solve the problem, so if you built the trust, even if someone else can come in and say, hey, we can do that too, you've built up enough trust that you get a higher willingness to pay for your product over the competitor's product. Just for that reason.
I think you're exactly right on that. And I'd say trust today we're recording this in 2023. Maybe somebody's listening to this far in the future, but at least now, trust is more difficult to build than it was a decade or two ago, because it's not just personal trust, right? It's professional trust. Do I trust that you have the capability, the intellect, you have the chops that you can really help me in business? That personal trust used to be enough to get the benefit of the doubt. It's like, well, I trust this person. I got a personal connection with them, personal relationship. And that used to be enough. If you were priced a little bit higher, get the benefit of the doubt, someone else a little more valuable, well, I trust this person. But now, today in business, you have to have the professional trust based on your credibility, your insight, the expertise that you bring to the table. That trust means as much as anything now.
Yeah. Okay. I've loved that conversation so far. You told me this was chapter 1.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm proud of the book. We got a lot of great stuff packed into it. So the growth leader takes a couple of decades of my experience and jams it into about 188 pages or so.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question, and I'm totally okay if we say, look, that's not the direction we want to go, but I deal a lot with subscription companies. And one of the problems we have with subscription companies is you've probably heard every one of your customers say, oh, we use land and expand. Yeah. Right. We have to go land a customer and then we expand a customer. And I can tell you, even in subscription where they've got this metric called net revenue retention, that's a really important metric that says, how well are you expanding, is essentially what that metric says. Mm-hmm. Companies don't focus on expand, and they focus a ton on land. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to grow your company, it feels like, anybody with any installed base needs to go focus much more on the expand side than they do. Yeah. So tell me, why do you think that is?
Well, there's an assumption that once you've landed that they will expand. Just because you've landed them, that's the hard part. And I don't want to dismiss just how hard that is, but there's this assumption, if we can get them in the door, then of course we will be good enough to keep them here. This is often a faulty assumption, but it is an assumption. I think that's why you end up seeing a lot of that. There is also the excitement of the new logo, the shiny new client, coming in the door. And the combination of those two things is dangerous, because executives end up forgetting just because they're a customer doesn't mean that the sales experience stops. In fact, the Gartner research that I cite in the Growth Leader says that for new business, it's around a quarter of the decision criteria. But once they've already selected you, once you're already in the door, once they're already working with you, they already familiar with what you have to offer. So the sales experience jumps to 53% of the decision criteria. So your ongoing efforts to continue to be helpful, to continue to provide insight, to continue to find ways for your solutions, your products, your services, which, by the way, aren't really solutions until you connect them to an outcome that you can be a solution for. But unless you're continually doing that, your value can devolve with them, can be taken for granted. And if it's not clear how much you're helping, well, then all of a sudden, the shiny new object can apply to your competitors here.
Yeah. I want to push back on something you said because it doesn't feel right to me. It could be
Please.
semantics or it could be that I
Yes.
don't understand.
Yeah.
You said that the sales experience jumps up after somebody buys.
Yeah.
But let me, when I think about value in let's call it a subscription business for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Before somebody buys, the only thing they can use is their perception of our value.
Correct.
Once they buy and use our product, they now experience our value.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the product. This is like the customer experience you talked about before, not the sales experience.
Yeah.
And so they buy or they upgrade based on real value, not on perceived value anymore.
Yeah.
And so I would think the sales experience becomes less important.
Well, I'm bringing in a piece of research from Gartner that cites that with existing customers, that the sales experience is 53% more than price, brand, and actually offering combined. So that's where that research is coming from. But I think that the place where you and I may have gotten snagged or tripped for a moment is where you say perceived value versus real value. You're talking about perceived value in the sales experience because, of course, I haven't bought it yet. I don't know what it's going to be. And then once I'm already a customer, well, then I already have that value. I have firsthand experience with it, right? It's no longer perceived. It's what I'm actually experiencing, right?
Yep, exactly.
So the place where I'd say the sales experience is still about creating value is that in the world of land and expand, where we started, if we're going to expand, that means doing things differently, finding more opportunities, right? Finding additional ways that we can be of help. So if you're going to expand business with an organization or a buyer who you're already working with, well, then it's incumbent that sales experience with you is even more of an impact because they do have the experience of your products and services. They do have firsthand knowledge of what it's like to be working with you. If I'm going to buy more, you have that much greater an influence. I hope I'm explaining that more clearly this time.
So I think what you're saying is that the customer experience of the initial product becomes part of the sales experience for the next product.
Yeah, I could go with that for sure.
Right. And if that's the case, then I'm 100% in agreement with that.
And you're saying it more succinctly than I did, more effectively. So I'm going to take your line there and use that in the next book.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. I'm not sure. So when we think about expanding customers, then
mm-hmm.
the issue is we just think it's going to happen automatically. And do you ever push back on executives, right? And say, look, you have to put something in place. You need a sales plan, a commission structure, a marketing plan, a customer success department. You need a lot in order to make expand really work. Absolutely.
One of the things that I think really drives it is if you recognize that the sales execution in your business, sales becomes the execution of your strategy. So if you have a strategy to land and expand, then your sales experience, your sales team's behavior in the field with customers every day, hundreds of times a day, maybe thousands of times, each one of those interactions represents the success or failure of your strategy based on what they did, who they were interacting with, how they responded in that moment. So if you have a land and expand strategy, then your sales team ought to be executing that strategy in every sales call. Are they doing that? Or are they pitching whatever they can, trying to sell whatever comes to mind, chasing whatever,
probably
right?
Chasing new logos.
Or chasing new logos. So if you say we've got a land and expand strategy, then your sales organization ought to be aligned to that. And you ought to be able to say, okay, I had 1,000 interactions with customers or prospects this week. How many of them did we execute the expand part of the strategy in? Any? A lot? A few? You could give them all a grade if you really, got technical about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Scott, I'm really enjoying this conversation, so I want to toss you the super softball.
Yeah, I love softballs. It's good.
What's your favorite chapter in the book?
Well, can I have a tie? Am I allowed to have the tie?
Well, you
You're
only
not
have
going to
6
let
minutes
me.
is the problem.
Hmm?
So go ahead. You only have 6 minutes.
Okay. So, So since we talked about sales experience already, and it's the underrated, differentiator, I'm going to say the chapter toward the end of the book, which is chapter 6, which I call the 3 C's of inspiring and communicating. And to me, if you are a growth leader, then so much of this is about how you communicate your strategy, how you align teams with it, and then most importantly, how you connect with others. So those 3 C's are clarity, credibility, and connection. The way executives can go about aligning teams with their strategy and bringing out the best in their teams. In the case we just talked about, helping their sales teams to execute their strategy every sales call. So if I'm a CEO or an executive and I have a strategy that I need to drive in the field, a go-to-market strategy, the success of which or failure of which is reflected every single sales call, then how do I align with that sales organization and get the best out of them so that they can deliver? That would be favorite chapter.
Okay, hit me with the 3 C's one more time. It was clarity, communication, and...
Now, clarity, credibility, and connection. And they would be the 3 C's of communicating and inspiring.
Okay.
Chapter 6.
Here's what I love about those 3 C's. They ought to be in chapter 1. How does a salesperson sell a product? Well, you communicate with clarity, you have credibility, and you create a connection with your customers.
Yeah.
Which is exactly how we started our conversation.
Yeah. And the fact that so all of that comes full circle, right? Because here we're talking a lot about leadership, and we started talking about the connection points between great selling and great leadership and how similar those behaviors and strategies can be, albeit with very different kinds of aims.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's amazing. Awesome. Scott, let's start to wrap this up. I'm going to ask you the final question, if that's okay.
Of course.
What is one piece of pricing advice you would give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to pricing advice, the value you're able to bring in the sales process is directly correlated to your ability to have any kind of elasticity or margin in your pricing. That if you really want to think about pricing, then it's not a spreadsheet exercise. It's an exercise in thinking about how do we create value in the sales process, and that will determine how much you can charge.
I love that answer. Now, I probably would have given the answer you gave slightly differently, as in, I want to understand how my customers could perceive value, and then see if my salespeople are able to communicate that, or help them. But I'm 100% in agreement with you.
Yeah, I think these are both in the same, at least on the same board for sure. Oh. That strategically, the ability to understand how your customers perceive value, and the value in what you offer, and perhaps more importantly, the value of how you can help them. What's the value of that, as you had talked about earlier, making that tangible and pragmatic for them? Even to the point of demonstrating specific financial impact or results, right? Yeah. So, of course, that's all in how they perceive the value. Your part in that is the co-creation of a shared understanding of how you can help them.
Yep. Absolutely right. Scott, this is fascinating. We're going to have to wrap this up. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
All right. I make a point of being very easy to find on the interwebs. So the website is my name, Scott Edinger, ScottEdinger.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. Again, Scott K. Edinger there. And if you were to search Scott K. Edinger or Scott Edinger in a browser, hopefully lots of my articles or books will show up. And again, I make a point of being easy to find. If you have difficulty finding me, contact Mark and tell him you can't find me. He will let me know. But it should not be hard. It really shouldn't be.
Not only that, there will be links in the show notes, so you'll be able to find them that way.
Fantastic.
All right.
Fantastic.
And to our listeners, thank you guys for your time. If you enjoyed this, would you please leave us a rating and a review? We just recently got a recommendation on LinkedIn. Alan Lamar, an operating partner at Banyan, wrote a long recommendation, but here's a quick snippet of what he wrote. Mark's ability to develop trust, engage people where they are, and challenge them to take new perspectives is remarkable. Within hours, he had seasoned veterans see the value they were providing their customers in a way they had overlooked for decades. Thank you, Alan. The check is in the mail. And finally,
well-deserved. Well-deserved, for sure. Well-deserved praise. I'll second it.
You. And finally, if you have any questions or comments about the podcast or pricing in general, feel free to email me, Mark, at impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.